Hello, everybody. My name is Monica Ricosi, and I would like to welcome you to the Fashion and Sustainability Summit. The 2020 series is a collaboration of Fashiondex and LIM College. The summit is sponsored by Eco-Life Yarns, as well as Kendor Textiles Limited and the Accessories Council. It's week 5, and we are about to have a conversation on sustainability and reducing transport impacts in fashion. Today's speakers are Kathleen Heygesi of Flexport, Burak Ayata of Kuehne Nagel, Lee Kindberg of Maersk, Nick Ammaturo of Subway and Beto. Our lead moderator is Andrea Kennedy of LIM College and Fashiondex, and our co-moderators are Bettina Hobson of LIM College and Elizabeth Mail, alumni of LIM College. So I'm going to actually ask that we start with our first speaker, Burak Ayata.
So my name is Burak Ayata. I have been in supply chain related industry last 20 years. I'm an adjunct professor in LIM College. I hold a PhD degree in technology and innovation and enjoying these kind of events. Next slide, please. So basically, I will cover the sea freight now quickly. Net zero carbon emission is our target. Currently, sea freight industry is producing 7% of global emission. Carbon emission is equal to around 500,000 cars per year, or around 400 million houses electricity consumption per year. As Kuehne Nagel organization, we were working on net zero carbon footprint, and we finalized scope 1 and scope 2, which was 10-year progress. We finished in 9 years. It was our project, and we finalized as of 2019. And we are in scope 3, which is actually covering our vendors, business travel, and our outsource organizations, commute, and shipping lines and truckers. So this will be next 10 years. And ideally, we would like to reach 2030, we would like to reach zero carbon emission. In order to learn as well as to follow certain regulations, rules, we partner up with organizations, Science-Based Targets Organization, UN Global Impact, Arctic Pledge, which is basically we don't pass by transpolar sea area to keep the ecosystem intact. Getting to Zero Coalition, Development the Climate Alliance. These are organizations we collaborate. As an organization, we have Global Transport Cargo Calculator, and we sign up around 2,300 customers. There are large organizations, small size organizations. So basically, they are using our tools to see the carbon footprint of their air, sea, road transportation, as well as their contract logistics. We use a system called Eco Transit, Trans IT. We use a product, Sea Explorer, in order to show the carbon emission of each shipping line. And so you can have a selection which organization you would like to use based on the carbon footprint of your product. Basically, this world, the technology doesn't allow us to reduce the carbon emission and omit the carbon emission 100%. So we use different technologies out there. We invest greenhouse to reduce the greenhouse gases. We try to offset with gold standard projects, and we follow United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. As well as each ton of carbon footprint, we offset by 2.
Thank you so much, Burak. Up next, we have Lee Kindberg.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Kindberg, and I'm head of Environment and Sustainability for Maersk for North America. So I'm going to give you just a quick sampler of some of the considerations you might need to consider when you are designing your supply chain for sustainability. And by the way, each of those containers on that box is the size of a city bus. So we're talking about some pretty big ships going around the world, and of course having to get things to and from the port and getting things in and out of those boxes to complete your supply chain. So ocean shipping accounts for 90% of internationally traded goods moving by sea. That does generate carbon dioxide. It's about 3% of the global man-made carbon dioxide that is related to, this is our sustainability strategy on one slide. Now our strategy is tied to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's based on a set of responsible business practices, but then we have 4 shared value projects, and I'm going to talk about 2 of those today. One is to help decarbonize logistics. The other is to help multiply the benefits of trade, because by helping people get their goods to market, we can help them lift themselves out of poverty. Moving things internationally is a very complicated business. You've got all kinds of manifests and customs and so forth. So it's a very complicated business. There are new digital tools out there that will actually help, particularly these smaller and medium-sized enterprises, get over the hump and learn how to do this so that they can actually begin to participate in the global economy. You'll see actually somebody who's benefited from this. To enable open and inclusive trade, people need training, they need tools, they need coaching and mentorships. There's a wonderful organization that we partner with called She Trades, SHE Trades, that focuses particularly on women-owned businesses that are trying to get over that hurdle and first begin shipping internationally. And we've provided and helped fund training materials that they then provide all over the world for any business that wants them. But again, we do particularly try to focus on these women-owned businesses. So some of these are things that you want to consider when you start to design your supply chain for your global brand. Now, we have also committed to net zero carbon emissions, and we operate 750 ships around the world. So getting to zero carbon emissions by 2050 means having to start launching some zero carbon emissions vessels by 2030. And nobody really knows the technologies or fuels to do that yet. But it also means continuing on an energy efficiency journey that started actually a number of years ago. So compared to 2008, we generate 42% less carbon per container of goods that are moved. That's 42% less for the same amount of cargo. And that's been done heavily by energy efficiency. We also, just last year, introduced our first carbon neutral product. It's actually a biofuel-based product using used cooking oil from Europe. So that also helps bring down our carbon footprint, even though it's a small amount right here at the beginning. So let's move on then. As Burak mentioned, there are global standards for how do you actually measure and report and calculate the carbon impacts of logistics operations. And if we'll click again, we'll see how that stacks up by mode of transportation. So ocean shipping is the most energy efficient, lowest carbon way to move cargo, followed by rail and then barge and truck. And then air at the other extreme is very fast, but it is much higher carbon intensity. So you really need to think about these things. Ocean means you're going to spend maybe 2 weeks in transit instead of 2 days. So you need to think through all of those things, and mode matters. It makes a big difference, as you can see. So let's look at an example. We're going to take some little boys' striped t-shirts made in Guatemala. We'll take them to the port of Santo Tomas, and we're going to bring them to a distribution center in Atlanta. So you see 2 different routes there. One is a red dotted line and the other is the green dotted line. The red dotted line brings the ship to Miami and then takes the goods off and puts them onto a truck. And the truck drives up from Florida to Atlanta. On the green line, you do pretty much the same thing, but you go through the port of Savannah. So you're on the ship a longer amount of time and on the truck a shorter amount of time. So you've got 1% difference, if you'll click again, 1% difference in the distance and 44% difference in carbon emissions. So that was what I wanted to say here in the beginning, that mode matters, location matters, the distance for raw materials and goods and to the store all matter in what your footprint is going to be. And I look forward to talking to you more.
Thank you so much, Lee. Up next, I'd like Kathleen Heygesi to introduce herself.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Monica. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. On the next slide, my name is Kathleen Heygesi, and I manage our programs at flexport.org. But on the next slide first, I'll tell you about Flexport. So Flexport, you can go to the next one, Monica. Flexport is the modern freight forwarder. Companies use Flexport not just to move freight, but to make better decisions about it. This is all-in-one digital platform shown here, and it's powered by a combination of technology, infrastructure, and logistics expertise. We offer a full range of services, including ocean, air, trucking, warehousing, customs, financing, and insurance. But most importantly, we want to give users visibility and control over their supply chains by combining software and human expertise. Building on this technology on the next slide, Flexport.org is my team, and it's a dedicated impact team of 10. It includes 3 engineers, and our goal is to use technology and logistics as a positive force for good, and to help companies bring sustainability into the core of their supply chains and planning. We do this through both environmental and social programs on the next slide. Our environmental program focuses on measuring, reducing, and offsetting greenhouse gases from logistics. So it's a building block process. We first calculate emissions following the Global Logistics Emissions Council framework in our platform, and it's free for all users. We make this also available to anyone through a free API, not just if you're using Flexport. We then advise companies on reduction strategies such as consolidations or switching modes. As Lee just mentioned, mode is going to be a huge factor of change for you there. Or you can take it a step further. So we work with Good Shipping to offer a switch from heavy marine bunker fuels to sustainable biofuels for ocean freight. But as we all know, emissions are unavoidable as a shipper, so we also offer an integrated carbon offset program to neutralize those emissions across all shipments. We also go beyond just emissions to think about the social side of sustainability. We have programs for nonprofits, aid organizations, and disaster relief. For example, this year we've delivered over 275 million units for COVID-19 relief efforts around the world. That's masks, food, relief aid, whatever it might be. And on the next slide, since 2017, our Flexport.org initiatives have offset over 82,000 tons of carbon. Most people, myself included, can't picture that impact or what that means. So for scale, that's equivalent to carbon sequestered by a forest, roughly 7 times the size of Manhattan over the course of a full year. And on the last side, I really believe that logistics players can work together to have an even bigger impact than this. So I'm really excited to discuss this together on today's panel with everyone in the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And last but not least, we have Nick Ammaturo.
Hello, Nick Ammaturo. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining. I'm currently the head of indirect procurement for Subway restaurant. We are privately owned, $17 billion company with 41,000 locations globally. I am also a co-founder and COO of a lifestyle brand and retail boutique called Fado. Over the last decade or so, I have managed procurement and supply chain for brands such as PepsiCo, Avon, most recently Coach, Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman. Prior to that was Saks Fifth Avenue, Lord & Taylor, Hudson's Bay Company. I've always been on the buy side, and most recently with my own company, have doing some of my own manufacturing. We've got a small private label, as well as just wholesale accounts. So very entrenched here in supply chain logistics from a buyer perspective, as well as just now a consumer of it. And always being conscious, and have worked with many of the panelist companies here. So it's exciting to see just what they've just highlighted. So, between technology and carbon footprint reductions, I can tell you from a buyer's perspective, we have seen that they are coming to market with these presentations, and it's exciting. So I'm happy to be here from the buy side and answer any questions. I've done several RFPs. And looking at total logistics and carbon footprint, and some things are just unavoidable, and I'm sure we'll get into those with some of your guys' questions and facilitated discussion. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to head this series over to our lead moderator, who is our very own Andrea Kennedy. Andrea, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'd like you to take it away, please.
Thanks so much, Monica. And thank you so much, Burak, Lee, Kathleen, and Nick, and everyone. I'm really excited. I'm your lead moderator. My name's Andrea Kennedy. I am work at Fashiondex and have for the last 25 years, as well as I teach full-time at LIM College, where I teach an intro to the fashion business class and all the sustainability classes. And I'm really thrilled to have this conversation. So if you have questions, put it in the chat box or the Q&A, and Bettina Hobson and Elizabeth Ma will read those in a little bit. But transportation really came into a greater focus for me. It's always been a big focus because I've worked globally for years, but a couple of years ago, I have to shout out to my Drawdown NYC group. Some of them are here today, but we were each kind of assigned to work on a solution. And I was like, oh, ships, please, because ships was one of the solutions to drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere if we change how ships are built and the operations of them and whatnot. So since then, I have, must confess, I became kind of like a transportation information junkie. But transportation really contributes globally, transportation, to so much of the CO2 that's put into the atmosphere every day. 152 million tons of CO2, climate warming pollution, is going up and being stored in our atmosphere. And that's, you know, a great contributor to cause climate change. And according to climatecentral.org in 2019, 29% of the greenhouse gases that were put up into the atmosphere came from the transportation sector. So it's the largest sector that contributes to climate change. So we need to get goods from place to place. We need to float them, fly them, drive them around. And but it is such a harmful practice the way it exists, although your four introductions give me a lot of hope. But let's start by talking about floating merchandise from country to country, and let's talk about ocean freight, please. What are each of your thoughts on how we can truly float goods in our very complex global supply chains more responsibly on water?
Since I'm the ocean shipper here, I guess I had to start this one off. First of all, energy efficiency, because the energy to drive a ship comes from the fuel that you burn, and it's diesel. These are very big diesel engines on these ships. So every time you burn a ton of fuel, you generate 3.1 tons of greenhouse gases. So that's if you're using standard petroleum fuels. If you use biofuels, then that fuel took the carbon dioxide, is made from plants. So it took the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then it's returned back to it in a very short cycle. So there's no increase in total carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So biofuels is one of the near-term answers to this thing compared to petroleum fuels. Another way that's sometimes done, and I think a couple of the other panelists have mentioned this, is to do offsets. If you can't change out your fuels and you still need to generate carbon or carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases, then you can also invest in building more windmills, renewable energy. You can invest in forests or in other programs that take carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere so that the total is zero. So it's energy efficiency, and then it's starting with new fuels, but to go all the way to zero, we're probably going to have to completely replace all of those petroleum fuels with something new, whether that is hydrogen fuel cells or something else. We're working on that right now.
Exciting. Thank you so much. Burak, did you want to add to that in terms of shipping more responsibly?
Sure. Yes. Utilizing more efficient vessels is number one, and some of them might be taking longer transit times. So basically optimizing your supply chain. It doesn't mean shortening your cycle lead time, but looking into right partners and looking at your total supply chain position, not only for the ocean, but you need to look into, as Lee gave an example before, you enter to, let's say, to go to Charleston, you enter via Savannah, and or instead of entering via Miami, I think C is developing very well, and they have a lot of initiatives. I can give you an example of CMA CGM. They have LNG vessels. They ordered 23,000 of them, 23,000 TEUs vessels. Maersk, which is our biggest partner, invested on battery pack vessels. By 2050, they might have a lot of vessels with battery pack. So they are looking to reduce. But if you are looking at current conditions, the supply chain managers need to dig in and find out which vessels are more efficient vessels. There are a lot of regulations out there, but they need to rearrange their supply chain process. That's my input.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Burak. Kathleen, where are you on my screen? You just moved. Did you want to add
No. Absolutely. I think as a shipper especially, we work with a lot of smaller shippers too, and you may not have as much control over the vessel that you're on or the ship technologies. So one of the things we really focus on is maximizing every single cargo move. There was a study in 2018, more than 1/3 of all global container ships had empty space in them. So as a shipper, you want to focus on your container and fill that up as much as possible. It can often come down to the product itself. So for example, we worked with an apparel company and they wanted to give all of their shoppers a reusable fabric carry bag instead of a cardboard or paper bag. The initial design of the bag had a rectangular base and a thicker fabric, and we did some planning with them to show that that design of the bag and the way it packs in the container would take up 2 to 3 times the amount of space as other models. Increased space means more shipments, and that equates to more carbon emissions. So they were actually able to use that data to facilitate conversations within their teams and say, hey, here's this design in the bag. How do we make it flatter? How do we make it smaller and make decisions from the beginning that actually allow you to ship less? And I think having that data and involving sustainability teams or having a logistics provider really speak to sustainability from the beginning is one of the many ways that you can approach a very holistic approach of how you're shipping less with ocean, less with overall per product.
You know, that's so amazing because we always say that 80% of the impact of a product or a garment, in our case, is determined during the design stage. So designing a new fold is what you're saying, where you can get more in a box. And I mean, it makes so much sense. So thank you so much. Also, though, talking about design from the supplier side, Nick, you know, where you actually are the one who sources and procures transportation. Any thoughts on C first, and then we're going to move to air next.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, it's preferred. When we get into air, I could give you the stress I've dealt with on many brands, just uncovering how much we actually spend in air. C is preferred, and obviously we've done some analysis at various brands. There was a big push for Made in America years ago. I think Walmart pioneered it with some beverage coolers, and I was at Lord & Taylor at the time, and we looked at how we could shrink just geography, and unfortunately, just so many manufacturers have moved abroad, and the cost was just not attainable to do things locally. So obviously ocean is, where it's at. I think appropriate lead time is that, is the best thing you could have. And obviously as we get into air, you'll get into some folks that just have needs, that feel that they need to be in market. I've dealt with so many brands that felt like they need to rush things or else someone will buy the other bag. And at the end of the day, it's just, you're eroding your margins in such a tight industry to begin with. So yeah, so ocean is always preferred. And obviously, as you get into these different types of fuels and they're becoming more sophisticated and mature, I think they're attractive. I think at the end of the day, though, because, depending on what your margins are as a brand, you're sort of, you might not be able to afford those different fuels. And I'm excited to see everything that's moving with all the brands here, especially that are on this call, because it is becoming more attainable and approachable. But to me, ocean is where it's at. And if you could do it locally, I mean, there's just not much to be made locally anymore. And the quality abroad is just so fantastic. So If I'm advising brands, I'll tell them just look at your footprint. Where can you source things a little bit closer? But it's just unavoidable today. So much has moved out of the States and just developed in so many other countries. And we want to support that, make sure that they're meeting certain standards and codes. So we're here for it. But yeah, the air is a very, very controversial subject. So I'm excited to get into air because it's been a pain point in the last decade of my career.
Yeah, so let's move directly to air, because a lot of companies do choose air simply because they need to get it there fast, either because they're late or they just want to get it first, or for all kinds of reasons, right? And when you fly by air, the CO2 emissions are, well, you saw Lee's chart. They are really, really increased more than tenfold, right? 100-fold. I'm not sure what it is. I was under the understanding that clean fuels are still fairly distant. You have given me hope, though, talking about the used cooking oil in Europe and whatnot. But let's talk about air cargo. So is it possible through better engines, through, improved efficiency to make air, because there are companies that are just going to do it. And when we order one thing and we get this free air shipping with delivery in a day or two, it's put on an airplane. So how can that happen more responsibly? Let's start. Burak, do you want to start, please?
Yes, actually it was one of the researchers I did previously a couple of years ago, and then last year there was an article also in Wall Street Journal. So these airlines happen to think about burning biofuel. This last time they burned biofuel, it was Virgin Atlantic, which is a British airline, right? Richard Branson's. They burn biofuel, and last 11 years, none of the airlines burn any biofuel. The airplanes are designed to burn better fuel, but they are not intending to do right now. I don't think it will happen. They are bleeding, they are suffering. And in addition to that, I'm in Turkey right now. There is a main reason I'm here. Turkey is a very large textile production country. They are manufacturing and high end. So they are converting their manufacturing facilities to produce gown for COVID, and they are producing a lot of masks. So these are like quick needs. So we fly them with El Al, with Israeli Airlines. We fly them with Turkish Airlines, with many airlines. These cargo aircrafts still, as Lee mentioned, they are excessively causing a problem to carbon emission. And they're expensive. At the same time, they don't follow any environmental improvements. So air cargo, air shipment, and airplanes in general for passengers, I haven't seen any improvements myself, and they are still producing that bad emission.
Okay, well, so not good news that for 11 years they've had the capability to use more efficient fuel that's cleaner and haven't. Excuse me while an airplane goes over me as we talk about airplane shipping. I feel like I'm screaming over an airplane. I'm at someone else's beautiful house right now because I have no power or internet or electric. But so what's stopping all of these then innovations to make flying, like, why aren't they? Is it money? Is it affordability that they're not putting in these fuels?
They're, from my point of view, they're traded in stock markets, and they want to show better profit every year. It's cost, and it's a lot of cost. And they have to maintain the union. They have their big challenges throughout the years. They are doing better than sea freight carriers or truckers in terms of finance, but that's my point of view. This is why I think it's the cost. Why I feel it's the cost.
Okay, thank you. Lee, do you want to add to that?
Yes, there is some hope in sight. There are global groups that actually measure and try to reduce these factors. for ocean shipping, it's the Clean Cargo Working Group. Here in North America for land transportation like trucking and rail, it's the EPA SmartWay program. There is a group that's just been formed called SAFA, which is Sustainable Air Freight. I think it's Alliance, but it might be association. And they are actually collecting real data from the air freight folks, just like Clean Cargo and SmartWay do from the other modes of transportation, so that you're basing your calculations on real data. And I think one of the other panelists mentioned the BLEC framework that gives you that real data and how to use it. So I'm encouraged to see that there is some commitment on the part of some of the big shippers, as well as their vendors, the air freight companies, to at least start to develop those methods to calculate and report actual rather than theoretical emissions. And then, of course, once you can measure it, then you can measure improvements.
Right. Yes, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Thank you so much, Lee. I just want all of the attendees to know we see your questions. I'm going to turn to Kathleen and Nick for their thoughts on this, and then we're going to bring in Bettina and Elizabeth to start asking your questions. But Kathleen and Nick, any thoughts on either air transportation, biofuels cost, please? You want to start, Kathleen?
Yeah, sure. I can start with air. Much like ocean, there is something you can do as a shipper now. We focus a lot on floating exercises. So kind of like Lee showed in the Miami to Savannah routing, you can do that same thing with air. I think ultimately as a shipper, it comes down to your partnership with your providers, what you ask for, what you want to look at, and what you want to see. Cost and speed will always be a factor in shipping, especially like you said, Andrea, if you're running behind and your shipments needed to be there a week ago to launch. But when it comes down to your individual shipments for quoting, for example, you can look at the impact of different routes. You can look at the impact of deferred flights versus express flights. If you're calculating those carbon emissions from the beginning and having that conversation of what's important to you, you can at least maximize when you are shipping via air. Those kind of data points are definitely ones that we start to look at. Maybe let Nick speak to it as a shipper too, kind of how you manage that process.
So every time I enter a new company, especially in the retail brands, I look immediately at the spend of air. And it always comes down to some astronomical number. And the first thing I'll do is I'll highlight it to the C-suite, and it's always sticker shock. A lot of leadership, just is unaware of what that actual spend is. And at the end of the day, every time I've dove into it, it just comes down to poor planning. On the brand side, as far as just how to meet a certain window. It could be a certain launch, could be collaboration, whatever it is. It always comes down to poor planning. And in my opinion, there should be no need for it. And I always challenge it. Obviously, there's going to be, there's always a need. I don't think any brand is not doing it. If they are not using air, then they figured it out. Unfortunately, it does come down to the planning cycle. And so I will usually go into an organization and look at it from design to finish and just try to understand where was the disconnect, where do we need to add in more lead time. But yeah, it's unavoidable. But it's always how to look at it, and highlight it to your leadership. Again, this is coming from a brand perspective, because it is, when you look at what you're sending and how much you're spending on it versus an ocean carrier, it's drastically different. And then yes, obviously the sustainability and carbon footprint impact is even worse. So again, it always comes down to education. If you're a brand and you're trying to reduce your air and you're look at your planning cycle. At the end of the day, that's always been 90% of the time that I've looked at a continuous improvement project, it has been that there is a window that was too tight and unrealistic, and it led us to air, unfortunately. So it's, again, it's one of these areas, it's always low hanging fruit for me when I come into a company. I'm like, let me see your air spend. And, at the end of the day, it's usually avoidable unless there was something, we got a dress for the Met Gala that had to get there and it was produced in Italy. And it's, there's always those one-off circumstances where, you have to meet a certain date for a celebrity, et cetera. That's unavoidable. But typical, in market, in fashion for a certain line, to me, it always comes down to poor planning, and it should be challenged.
Right, and then we have to rush it because to avoid chargeback dollars. So yes.
Oh,
All right,
yeah,
thank you so much.
so
Let's
costly.
move to I'm sensitive of
Just one more.
time. So let's move to Bettina Hobson, an amazing recent grad school alum from LIM College for the first question. And then we'll move to Elizabeth and go back and forth and then come back. Bettina, take it away.
You. Thanks, Andrea. Hello, everyone. Just great information so far. So first question, I think a lot of us, including our panelists, are very sustainably minded. So with that being said, Keith Vuz emailed us a question saying, within each of your spheres, how widespread is the motivation towards sustainability? I think most of you all touched on an aspect of that, but maybe if you want to use this time to elaborate on an initiative or your brand's commitment to that, maybe.
Well, I'll jump in first.
Thank you.
We've been members of the Clean Cargo Working Group, which is it's a business-to-business group made up half of shippers and half of carriers. Which means that anytime we sit down at the table to talk about carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, those kinds of things, we're talking to our customers. And when the customer talks, people listen. So the customers that helped found Clean Cargo and also helped found SmartWay and so forth are people like, oh, Nike was there, Starbucks was there, Nordstrom was there. IKEA was a member. These are people who've not only spent money, but also spent time developing these methods and trying to understand how shipping or how emissions can actually be reduced. And then trying to come up with something that then can be published so that everyone can make use of that data each year. So if you Google, by the way, Clean Cargo or Clean Cargo Working Group, you can actually pull up trade lane by trade lane emissions factors that are industry averages for over 85% of all of the ships out there for container ships. I guess the most important thing that we see from the customers, though, is the demand signal. If you don't send us a demand signal, then how will we be prioritizing our spending? It is so important that we, on the planning side of it and the C-suite side of it, here, we want you to be more sustainable because when the customer talks, we listen.
I absolutely love that. That's great. Man signals are a big passion of mine. So you probably see me over here kind of. Thank you again, Lee. Kathleen, would you like to answer that before I pass it over to Elizabeth?
Yeah, absolutely. And a great question. I mean, as a company, we're extremely dedicated to sustainability. We want to ensure our technology is used for good. Luckily, my role is working one-on-one with companies to realize that within their own companies and make it happen. So very similar to what Lee is saying, but essentially a lot of what we do is actually education. And it's saying with a logistics manager, hey, here are your carbon emissions. Here's why it's important. Now, here are tools to go and tell this story internally to leadership. We've seen over and over again that internal storytelling and getting people to care. If it's not something that's really top of mind for the company, how do you empower people to use the data and have that conversation? So just like a very small example of that, we oftentimes calculate carbon emissions, but like I was saying earlier, it's really difficult to know what that means. What is a metric ton of CO2e? So we use the EPA's equivalency calculator, which is available online. And instead of telling your exec, hey, we emitted 500 metric tons of CO2 during that emergency air shipment, you can say, but that equals emissions to driving in a passenger car around the equator 50 times. That's something we have to work on and focus on. So for us, I mean, we care so deeply, but luckily it's just really working with customers to integrate that and begin programs if they don't have them yet.
Thank you. I like the fact that you put numbers to that, real life metrics that people can understand. I want to pass it over to Elizabeth. Thank you both again.
Hi. All right, so another question that we have is from Cassidy, and she's asking if someone could further define carbon neutral and how companies are improving their supply chain to achieve this goal.
So obviously first off, it's understanding what your footprint is. So proper reporting and tracking is critical. You have to understand what your baseline is, and then from there, it's setting reasonable goals. I'd say as far as any impact you can make, obviously mode of transportation is important. What I'd say is the biggest thing is offsets. What I also do in my former life for the last 8 years or so, I ran energy procurement for some of the major brands that I mentioned earlier. And it's a lot of offsets, things that you can do to offset your footprint. Just in your stores and operations, it might be your warehouse that you have, distribution center, your retail footprint. You can switch things to, make conscious decisions to offset where you can. You'll never get, obviously there's always a footprint. So understanding how and how you're able to offset it, it could be, buying wind power for your distribution centers, converting to solar, setting up proper recycling channels. So there's always something else you can do, outside of everyone getting more kind of biofuels. And, if we could figure out teleportation, I know it's one of our potential future questions on this, but outside of that, it's what can a brand do? And from the Subway's perspective, we have the largest footprint from a geography location of anything in the world, 41,000 locations. We have surpassed McDonald's. And what we're looking at is how to reduce our footprint in our direct materials from, the produce to the proteins to the bread. And right now we're actually looking at our packaging pretty significantly to understand how to look at more sustainable packages. So it's across every aspect, how to, it can't just be in supply chain transportation. You need to relook at how you approach it as a company, and hopefully you can get to carbon neutral. I mean, it's a goal that all of us achieve. For us, it's going to be very difficult because our footprint in certain geographies are not as conscious of sustainability. So we'll make every effort in countries where we can. But all brands should be aware that it's not just your transportation. It's how do you run your stores? How do you run your DCs? How do you pay your employees? If you're still cutting paper checks, you should switch to ACH. There's so many ways to reduce your footprint and get to a neutral stance. So I urge everyone to look at how they do things in their everyday life.
Brand, let me see. Sarah asked a question. When calculating CO2 emissions for ocean freight, is this figure just taking into account the emissions into the atmosphere? Are there pollutants that make their way into the ocean that go unaccounted for? I'd like to maybe, if I could, ask Burak and lead this question. Burak, if you want to start.
Sure. Lee is more experienced on this because ship owners and they do a lot of moves globally. But we basically use their tools, or we use their data in order to calculate our carbon footprint per TU. TU is equal to 20-foot container. That's the industry standards. That's why I will pass over to Lee. She might be covering this more in details.
When we talk about something that is carbon neutral, we're really only talking about one of the environmental aspects of shipping. So just like with your personal car, and by the way, a lot of that 29% is our own personal cars, but just like your personal car, what comes out of the tailpipe includes greenhouse gases, and it includes other less pleasant cats and dogs. I think we all realize there's carbon monoxide, for example, in tailpipe emissions, and there's some other pollutants. Those things do go into the atmosphere. Some of them, like carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxides, can end up dissolved in the ocean, as can, say, some of the sulfur compounds. Typically, when we're talking about climate, we talk about greenhouse gases or carbon neutrality. When we talk about air quality, particularly in port cities, then we need to think about all of those other things that may have health effects, like some of the ones that I just mentioned. And I could go on and on about that, but I think maybe I better cut it off so that we can get to some more of the questions. I hope that covered what you were concerned about.
Thank you, Lee. No, it's always great. Your information's always on point. I gotta pass it back to Elizabeth for maybe some more chat questions that came in.
Okay, another question we have, and I'm actually curious about this as well, is how far along is the development of the biofuel industry?
Absolutely. I'm not an expert. I do try to keep up as much as possible on it. I think biofuels are and will be incredibly important when thinking about decarbonization. From what I've gathered, there's challenges with scaling. So maybe some of the technology is available, maybe you know some of the answers, but there needs to be an availability, there needs to be an ease of use, either within existing vessels or upgrading vessels that you have in order to take this type of fuel. You need to think about the fuel itself. Some have unintended negative consequences, so some biofuels are better than others. But all that being said, I don't think reduction goals will be met without incorporating biofuels into that. I think it's been hampered a little bit by the availability and low cost of fuel. As you're seeing the availability of fuel, the investments into technology, the long-term developments that are required, it might not be at the same scale, which is why biofuels might not have taken off at the same pace as solar energy or wind energy or other alternatives to traditional technology. But that's why personally we work with Good Shipping. So as I mentioned earlier, they're a company that offers a switch from heavy bunker fuel to marine biofuel, even if not in the actual vessel that you're moving. So as a shipper, I might be moving on, China to the U.S. West Coast because that's my supply chain, but Good Shipping offers a switch where I can power biofuels in a vessel that's not mine. So there's ways that organizations and companies can do it now, even if that full-scale technology isn't there yet. But Lee may have more of the technicalities of the ships, of course.
That was a really great summary, Kathleen. Just to add on to that just a little bit, we do have currently a product just like that, and it's like buying green power. You may not get the green electrons at your house, but you actually have reduced the environmental impact of the whole grid by purchasing green power in an amount that is equivalent to what you've used. So we're doing that with our eco delivery product right now. One other consideration with biofuels, just to close the loop though, is what was that biofuel made from? Was food taken away from potentially becoming food and used to make biofuels? Like some biodiesels might be made from food stocks. So we currently do not purchase any biofuels that are made that would compete with food production or would be using what would be diverted from use as food. We will use agricultural waste. We'll use waste products like used cooking oil, but we have some fairly strict internal standards about what constitutes an acceptable biofuel, particularly because of that scalability issue that Kathleen mentioned. When you take it to huge scale, you don't want to be taking that much food out of the food chain.
Right. All right, well, thank you for answering that.
Thanks, Lee. That was great tie into circularity about the use of waste, etc. Our next question comes from Tracy, and her question is, in the ocean shipping industry, are some companies also looking at broader sustainability issues such as biodiversity or impacts on wildlife? In particular, she's thinking of examples such as strikes or negative effects from ocean noise to marine mammals. So I know that for me personally, I've seen the World Wildlife Federation does something like this. That's where they're involved in those types of aspects, but I definitely would like to turn this over to our experts. Whoever would like to answer. Lee's raising her hand, yay, okay.
Well, this one sounds like it's mine again since it's ocean.
Sure,
I might
please.
just mention that we're still all trying to understand the impacts of underwater noise on various types of marine mammals and other species. And we now believe that ocean noise has impacts all the way down to very small marine species as well as some of the big mammals. But certainly underwater noise is a concern for whales and porpoises and species that do echolocation and use underwater sound to communicate with each other. We did a study with Scripps last year, it's a couple of years ago, that actually showed that there are things you can do to make the vessel more energy efficient that also reduce underwater noise. So that was pretty exciting, but we don't know if that's translatable to other types of vessels. So it's still very much a developing area. Scripps Institute of Oceanography in La Jolla, California is one of the areas that's leading. NOAA is also very involved, and Transport Canada is very involved. But I think here in North America, particularly in Canada, folks have taken the lead in trying to address this specific issue. In particular, if you're more interested in more information, take a look at the ECHO program, ECHO, at Port Metro Vancouver. They've done some really great incentive programs to get vessels to slow down and are actually doing measurements of underwater noise.
We are at time. Let's come
Oh
back.
my goodness, that hour goes so fast.
It went very fast today. Thank you, Elizabeth and Bettina, for those great questions. I want to ask you each for your final thoughts. There was a question about trains in the chat box that I would have, if you want to respond to that. But, you know, if you could either talk about where a fashion brand should start if they want to ship today in the most sustainable and responsible way, or I feel like I've been a little dismayed in my research. I found beautiful photos of container ships with wind turbines, container ships with solar panels, container ships with ducktails, and all that are supposed to, you know, same thing with airplanes. But we're seeing all of this great innovation, and often I find out, oh, that pic's been photoshopped, I'll learn when I ask that company, you know, and they'll say, well, you know, that's in the works. So what's amazing, what's coming around the bend, what's optimistic in terms of shipping? You could either speak to that and leave us with some great innovative ideas, or just some advice to brands and/or in how to ship in more responsible ways right now. So Burak, let's start with you, please.
I will give an example from what Nick does. Nick works for Subway. There's a pretty price-sensitive products he's shipping, food items. But a company like Prada, company like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, their products are very expensive. The cost of air freight is not big impact for them. And they intend to fly them all the time. So as a consumer, if you question their carbon footprint, that'll be very helpful, because they are spoiled in terms of the price point and the impact of the freight to their commodity. So all luxury brands, their carbon footprint is beyond control. They will not put that nice cowboy boots or nice bags from Chanel or nice perfumes into, I mean, perfume is a little different because it has with cargo. But I have seen, and then we are doing fashion logistics, a lot of it, and I have seen most of them flying. So that's, I think they should take responsibility as organizations. In terms of other organizations, they need to look into entire supply chain rather than looking at one point. We can do sea air, we can get there in 5 days, you can do more nearshoring, meaning buying the same product from multiple vendors in the same quality. So maybe for a longer transit time, using better fuel efficient vessels and sourcing from Ecuador, which is 15 days transit time to United States, let's say, versus sourcing from Vietnam, it will be around 27, 28 days. So they need to look into different dynamics of the supply chain in order to reduce the carbon footprint. And it can be done. They can use more fuel efficient vessels. As I was giving you example, CMA, this is a large organization, and Maersk, they are heavily investing. And there was another gentleman on the chat, he was saying about electricity. Yes, battery power, yes, organizations are looking into it. Does the technology exist? Not yet. Until it gets there, we need to look into other solutions with some computer systems, with supply chain optimization systems to reduce that carbon footprint from my point of view.
Thank you so much. Who wants to go next? Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think, most of these companies, just data, just look at your data constantly, understand data, what metrics you're tracking, set KPIs, key performance indicators and dashboards. Again, I think understanding whatever the product is, whatever it is, understanding what your baseline is and how to make it better. I think obviously if you're designing a product from scratch, trying to, I'm making some face masks now, and we determined that, in March we started the company, and we found recycled products out of LA, and we're producing them locally in LA, and we tried to make an effort to reduce our footprint from the beginning. So if you're starting from scratch, think about it from the beginning. But if you're a mature brand or company, just start tracking it now. If you're not tracking it, call one of these companies. Any of them have the technology to do it, and you could start looking at, how to make it better. But if you don't know what you're spending and what your footprint is, then you'll constantly be chasing just wrong information. So anyone can do it. It's just a matter of having the right data. Amazing.
Thanks so much, Nick. Kathleen or Lee? Kathleen, you want to go next?
Sure, and I'll try to be quick. I know we're over time. I think for everything in sustainability, in terms of what I'm most excited about, there is no silver bullet. There's no magic technology that will come and save us. So what we really focus on is just a combination. Like Nick said, use data and logistics planning. Always think about what you're tracking. How can we make vehicles more efficient and use those? How can we make fuels more efficient? Combine that with biofuels and alternatives like electricity. And I think what's most exciting for the industry is just increasing partnerships. So the four of us on this line and every other logistics player, we should never be operating in a silo, and neither should our customers. So for me, it's how can we work together across the industry to tackle not just the small problems day to day that a company can focus on in their supply chains, but things we can do all together.
Thank you so much. And Lee.
They all made really great points. So let me just wrap it up by saying we as consumers have a responsibility too. We need to be asking the questions. We need to be looking at company sustainability reports. Should I buy this bag or this bag? Which company is actually taking their responsibility for sustainability and actually putting their data out there and showing what are their challenges, where are they making progress, where are they failing? And what do they need? Because again, those demand signals are so important. And then you as designers and marketers going into the fashion industry have an enormous opportunity to start inserting these questions into the whole decision-making process as you go into companies that are in this business. So you in particular have the opportunity now to, again, asking the right questions, getting the right data. And sometimes you have to start with small baby steps, but at least you're starting and you're measuring your progress.
Thank you all so much. We are a global economy, with globally producing, we're globally connected in so many ways. So goods are going to continue to be made all over the place, right? If we stop that, other problems exist. But I do agree, Burak, when you talked about, looking at your supply chain, bioregionalism, which is, making place-based thinking and all of that in the supply chain cities and areas are important. But I loved, Nick, when you talked about better planning, right? Maybe just start 2 weeks earlier so you don't have to, change your design calendar, and then the better folding. And then, Lee, I really love that when you said when a customer talks, you listen at Maersk. So that, as you said just now too, that we all have a voice and that we should use it. But I thank all four of you, as well as Bettina, Elizabeth, Riley, Rebecca, Monica, Amy and Tara, who were here and just clicked off, and Kathy for you also. But thank you all so much. This conversation could go on because, there's legislation involved and costing and all of that, but thank you so much. Oh, and Monica, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you to everybody who's part of this. I would once again like to thank today's sponsors, Eco Life Yarns, Kendor Textiles Limited, and the Accessories Council. If anyone is actually interested in becoming a sponsor for any of these series, please feel free to reach out to myself, Juana, or Gladys. You could find our information in email at fashiondex.com, or feel free to type your email into the chat. I'd be more than happy to reach out to you. I also wanted to say that the latest edition of the Fashion Designer Sustainable Sourcebook is out and available. Check it out at fashiondex.com/store. Join us and sign up for next week, week 6 we're going to be having a conversation on sustainability and fashion at Marc Jacobs, Eric Lamb, and Dr. Scholes. Speakers will be Lisa Deagle, of Marc Jacobs, Casey Royster of Derek Lamb, Katie Moore, and Nicole Prudence, both of Dr. Scholes. Our lead moderator is going to be Eurydice Sanchez, Riley Bott, and Frankie Cognali. And if you would like, next week, week 7, is going to be a conversation on sustainability and fashion at Cotopaxi, H&M, and Eileen Fisher. The speakers will be Amy Hall, Abigail Camarez, Annie Agel, and Sabrina Moscala. The moderators will be Riley Bott and Rebecca Margolis. Thank you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will see you next week.